Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome back to Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. Yes, indeed. So, I took a little bit of time off there to sort of recuperate the creative juices and just work on a bunch of other stuff. But I am back with a new video for you guys, and I'm happy to say that in my absence, I have figured out a couple of new and interesting things. Among them, I now have the ability to reliably capture footage from a whole whack of Commodore platforms, including the Commodore 64, the 128, the PET, the VIC-20, the CBM, or CPM I should say, as well as the Commodore Amiga. So expect a whole bunch of Commodore coverage in the future. I absolutely love these platforms. I grew up with them as a kid, and they have some of the best 8-bit computer titles of all time on them. So this is going to be a blast. I can't wait to do more of this stuff for you guys. So, what are we talking about today? Well, we are talking about BC's Quest for Tires. This is kind of an interesting title because, as you can see there, this was actually published by Sierra Online. But it was published in 1983, which is before Sierra kind of really hit their mainstream stride, if you will, with the Quest series of games. So the Police Quest, Space Quest, King's Quest, etc. So this is a title that they actually published. They didn't make it. It was made by a company called Sydney Development. And this title was developed, as many games were back in the day, pretty much by one person by the name of Charles Benton, who's actually got his name on a number of notable titles. And it's kind of interesting because this game, it's a fairly simplistic action platformer title, but what's interesting about it, aside from the fact that I played it a whole bunch as a kid, is that this title actually predates a lot of these sort of well-known, you know, pivotal premier action platformers. You know, this game came out before Super Mario Brothers, for example. And it's a game that has it has some fond remembrance among people of my era, if you want to call us that, but it's not as well known as others. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at it. It's kind of interesting. This is actually a licensed game, if you can believe it. Apparently, there was a newspaper comic in the 1980s called BC, and this game takes the character likeness and sort of, I don't know, setting, if you want to call it that, from that. And I don't know, I've never been big into comics of any stripe, and I don't believe BC was carried in the Ottawa Citizen, which is the sort of was the main paper in this town back around that era. Maybe it was, but I don't know. So yeah, the general premise is there's really no story. Your girlfriend has been kidnapped by a dinosaur, and you are riding your stone unicycle, which seems to be powered by perpetual motion and is not affected by things like steep inclines, and you're trying to navigate this increasingly perilous world to attempt to reach her. That's pretty much all there is to it. But it's really cool in that I really like this game because, number one, it's a pretty fun score attack game, and because this was on a home computer as opposed to a cartridge-based console, certain things were much more easily achieved. For example, this game was able to permanently save your high scores to the disc. So that was a very rare thing to see in console games because it required battery backup hardware that was incredibly expensive at the time, and most publishers didn't want to get in on that. Whereas in this game, it's very easy because the game came on a floppy disk, and you just wrote the scores back and away you went. So it was very easy to both challenge your own high scores as well as challenge your friends. I knew a few people when I was in school who actually had a copy of Quest for Tires because, well, and I say copy because everybody pirated everything on the Commodore 64. And they actually had a copy of the game that they would pass around to each other so that they could attempt to beat each other's high score. Sneakernet leaderboards, man. We didn't have no Xbox Live. We didn't have no Steamworks. We handed floppy disks around, and we liked it, consarn it. So you're seeing the basic premise here. I mean, this is a fairly simplistic title. Your goal is to navigate a whole bunch of different obstacles in the world and do it in... Oh, God. And the thing that I really like about this game is that it mixes things up very, very frequently. So there are a fair number of levels in the game, and this game starts you off pretty easily, but it quickly becomes kind of balls hard, as you're seeing right here. It gets really tricky really fast, and it actually lent itself to a fair amount of replay value, which was pretty cool because it had a very good iterative difficulty curve. And because play sessions of the game were generally fairly short, it was relatively simple to... Oh, I ran out of lives on that one. There we go. It was relatively simple to actually play the game in short spurts if you wanted, and it would take, and you could sort of get better at it each time. I actually didn't play this a lot back on the Commodore because, man, I'm not only going to date myself here, but I'm going to make some retro gaming deep cuts right now. This is something that probably only my fellow Ottawa citizens are going to remember. Who watching this show remembers the Naboo? What? Yeah. I bet... Wow, yeah, the Naboo, man. If you don't live in Ottawa, you probably never heard of the Naboo. If you knew what that thing is, or better yet, if you own one, I implore you to leave a comment because I would love to talk to you. The Naboo was this crazy, on-demand computing platform that ran through your cable, like your television cable. It was about 1 billion years ahead of its time, and it pretty much was it was done by an Ottawa company called Naboo Manufacturing, and it basically only... the Naboo company failed miserably, but they were basically a company that existed, they served almost Ottawa exclusively. But the Naboo platform had some really good games on it, some really good ports of other games, and this was among them. And it played almost as well as this one does, and I played a ton of it on there. And it was a great system, but the Commodore 64 plays this game quite nicely as well. But it came out on a bunch of other things, including the Apple II, Atari 8-bit systems, DOS, the MSX, the ZX Spectrum, the ColecoVision. I mean, games like this, when games were made by one person, it was fairly easy to put them out on a lot of different platforms, and there were a lot of platforms back then. So you tended to see this stuff a lot. But, it's a simplistic game. I mean, for 1983, this title was fairly technologically impressive, but it's lacking some things like, for example, there's no music. I mean, the Commodore 64 was famous for the compositions that people could put out using its proprietary SID music chip. But this game basically doesn't have any music, because it was very, very early on in the Commodore life cycle as well. But it's a really solid, really challenging platformer title that really, there are people who remember it fondly, but it doesn't get a ton of respect when you put it up against something like a Sonic or a Super Mario Brothers or whatever. But this predates all of those and still has some pretty solid mechanics. And you know what? As simplistic as it is, like, I'm still having a lot of fun with this. I played a bunch of this before I started recording, and I'm really enjoying this still. I'm having a lot of fun with this. It's very, very challenging, but it constantly mixes things up, which is what I like. There's variety in it, and it's variety that changes fairly often. It's kind of funny because, like I was saying, this game sort of rewards you playing it in short iterative sessions, but that kind of doesn't always work because, well, if you know anything about the Commodore 64, then one of the things you will know is that it is famous for its gargantuanly long load times. It's rather funny because there's actually a hilarious slash depressing slash face-palming story about the reason why that happened. It was actually a design flaw that caused that. I'm not going to go into it here because it'll take too long to explain, but I will... Okay, that is a horrible looking creature animation, man. Aw, screwed that up. So it is kind of amusing that this game rewards sort of short iterative play like that because, wow, this is the furthest I remember getting in this game for quite some time. Because this game could take a couple of minutes or more to load. And, the Commodore 64 was a platform where you basically, you went and you had to plan out your afternoon of gaming. Like, some games would take so long to load, like we're talking 5-10 minutes just to get it started up, not even to load each level or to save high scores or anything like that. You would fire up, you would have to plan your gaming afternoon, because you could start loading a game, go make lunch, eat it, come back, and if you were lucky, it was loaded in. Assuming, of course, there wasn't a problem with the disc or the drive. Yay, I rescued the girl. Yeah, assuming, of course, there wasn't a problem with the disc or the drive that would render your game unable to load and have the friggin' trouble light of death flashing on it, which was, oh boy, a number of times that happened to me. Now, the reason, of course, we're not experiencing that here is I am actually running this through an emulator package, and it's very cool. I'm going to be doing full reviews of these in the future, but I am playing this through Cloanto's C64 Forever package, which is a PC-based emulator package that you can buy fully legally, and in that package comes a whole whack of legally licensed games. I don't know how they got all these, but they're all on here, and they're supposedly all completely legit. They would have been shut down by now, I'm sure, if they weren't. And this is among them. So if you actually want to play Quest for Tires in a completely legal way, along with a whole bunch of other titles, you can just buy this package, and they come pre-configured, ready to play. You basically load the thing up, you load the package up, you hit play, and off you go. They do, to get the super fast loading speeds, do require a little bit of tweaking, but it's pretty straightforward to enable those settings. And it allows this game to load pretty much instantaneously instead of taking minutes, which is a really nice plus. And I quite like it. I think the package works really well, but I'm going to do a full review on the package itself in the future, kind of like I did with Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection and Capcom Arcade Cabinet, things like that, so that you can get an idea of what the actual use of the package is like. So, but I still think this game is really, really fun. I've been having a lot of fun playing it in prep for this video, and I think it still holds up really well. I mean, it's basic, absolutely is. This is a pretty straightforward title, but at the time, this was considered pretty impressive, both technologically and even from a game design perspective. And there are titles that are well regarded for sort of being the pivotal platformers, but this is where they're rooted as well, and I think it deserves major props for that. There was a sequel to this game as well, that, as far as I know, I never actually heard of it until recently, so I don't think it was very well received, but it is out there, and I'm assuming it's just this with more iterations on the formula, but I'm going to try it out someday, and we'll see how it is. But yeah, that is BC's Quest for Tires. Published by Sierra Online and developed by Sydney Development, may they both rest in peace. Thank you, Activision. In 1983 for a whole mess of platforms, but I have been looking at the Commodore 64 version, which is considered pretty much the best one. You can play this legally in the quite reasonably priced C64 Forever collection from Cloanto, and I would highly recommend checking it out if it interests you. This is still a fun platformer to this day, and it's the best way to play it. My name has been Parallax Abstraction. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.